While it's great to dream of growth, you must first plant the seed. In order to implement proper change, it is important to remain patient and take the right steps to do so. Hello, my name is Alex, and I'm here with my colleagues Claire, Rachel, and Zach from the University of Alberta, and we are here to discuss Fair Employment Agency. Now, until now, Fair Employment Agency has used their fair hiring model as well as their commitment to educate every element of the recruitment industry to become one of the most not only ethical recruitment agencies, but one of the leading recruitment agencies in Hong Kong as well. However, one beautiful flower does not a garden make. And just like a flower in full bloom, Fair Employment Agency now has seeds and potential to plant elsewhere throughout the recruitment agency in order to make change in very meaningful ways. Now, while the agencies may be the key to the solution, they are also a major issue and they cannot be solved purely on their own, which is why it's important to make sure we are targeting all three elements of the industry, which are the workers, the agencies, and the employers. Now, Zach will walk us through our executive summary.
This presentation will address the key problem of how can Fair Employment Agency grow to continue redefining the recruitment agency standard. We will speak on three alternatives. Firstly, organic growth in Hong Kong, then creating a franchise model, and lastly, expanding the business into the Philippines, where we'll lead into our recommendation of the Fair Employment Pipeline, which aims to make a robust connection between employees and employers to set an industry-wide standard. We will assess this through an impact of a 10% increase annually in workers using the service and the establishment of that new standard. When analyzing the strengths of FEA, we can see that first and foremost, there is a demand for the service. With employers willing to pay a premium and over 5,000 migrant worker job placements already having occurred, there is a demand for these services. Additionally, the established infrastructure of the Fair Trading Center and the Honest Jobs service in the Philippines has provided a great inroads to the country with the largest amount of migrant workers. And lastly, the technology utilized by FEA has set it apart from all other firms as it is the only one to be fully digitized. I would now like to pass it on to Rachel with the financial analysis.
Thanks, Zach. Another strength of the FEA is the fact that they have been able to break profitability in 2018. With this, we have been able to put it towards an amount of $2,900,000 that you were able to reinvest into the company to help grow that new worldwide standard. Claire is going to take you through exactly which stakeholders will need to be informed for that.
So we did conduct a stakeholder analysis, and we would like to focus the financial impact Rachel just introduced to three key stakeholders moving forward. So the first being the foreign workers, who are the focal point of your organization. However, they are the ones being taken advantage of from employment agencies that victimize them through debt bondage. Next, we want to look at the employers. The employers want properly matched workers who are qualified and trained for the work they need done, and they want to get those workers ethically. A key thing to acknowledge here is that over 70% of Hong Kong employers would pay a premium to ensure their workers are avoiding debt from placement fees. And lastly, we just want to look at the government regulators who are being outnumbered in an overly saturated market where there are currently 1,400 domestic worker employment agencies for a single government agency to regulate. And when looking at the challenges being faced by these three stakeholders, it is clear that they are all suffering from an unregulated and overly saturated industry. But thankfully, with the growth and expansion in FEA services, we can look at taking away some of that burden off of this industry. And we will now get into that with our different growth options that can help achieve this. So when trying to decide the best method for FEA to continue growing, we did examine the three alternatives that were outlined in the case. The first being seeking organic growth in Hong Kong by further establishing new branches directly under the agency's control. So why this would be a good option is you have had high success rates following your current model, and you can continue making a positive impact in Hong Kong through the development of more branches. However, it is important to note that you can only expand so much, and after a certain level, you can't go further. And as this is a highly saturated market, one additional branch could struggle to give you your desired impact. The next option focuses on creating a franchising model. So doing this would allow your services to expand more rapidly across countries and could start combating industry issues in new markets. A disadvantage of this approach, however, is that it would be difficult to ensure all standards are being upheld to your desired level and that your mission is being effectively portrayed. And lastly, we examined expansion efforts in the Philippines. So this would allow FEA to focus on the progress being made with their current businesses, FTC and Honest Jobs, and developing these further would help address many issues at the source. However, this expansion won't fundamentally change the industry on its own. Of the three options we were provided with, we do believe an expansion in the Philippines is aligned with what FEA wants to accomplish. However, it doesn't fully address all problems at hand. So an additional component is required, and Alex will introduce you to our recommendation and an overview of each step.
We've decided to call our recommendation today the Fair Employment Pipeline, with the intention to not only change the way agencies behave within the recruitment industry, but also make fundamental changes from beginning to end, including both workers and employers who are on opposite sides. The first phase of this implementation will be, as we have mentioned, expanding and streamlining the services in the Philippines to create more comprehensive services for prospective Filipino workers, and increase education on the worker side. We will also target education on the employer side by growing the pledge network. And finally, we will look to make substantial difference within the agency market as well by implementing the Fair Employment Certification. We're about to dive into all of this, and Zach will start us off.
In order to ensure industry-wide change occurs, we must first ensure that the actions of FEA are ethical from employee to employer. The initiatives with the Fair Training Center that trains employees on right practices and the Honest Job Services, which locate safe jobs around the world for potential employees, serve to make a great pave the way into this location. However, there are still three main challenges affecting these workers. Firstly, the language barrier. Secondly, the misinformation put forth by other agencies. And lastly, the lack of any congruent regulation amongst countries. Next slide, please. This stage of the implementation will merge the Fair Training Center and the Honest Job Center into under one roof, providing a comprehensive and effective program that will set up and prepare every employee, whether they are working elsewhere or in Hong Kong, through FEA. Next slide, please. We will do this by combining the two Manila locations into one location and then expanding into Davao City, which represents the city with the second most population of migrant workers. On top of this, we will also provide services of location and phone numbers so that the transportation of the employees to their new job site is also ethical. This will be comprised of a 1-hour course of the Fair Training Center, wherein they can then utilize the Honest Job Service after having known all of what they need to. If this model does work, this will be the plan that will then be implemented in Indonesia in the future.
So now that you have expanded and streamlined these services, how are you going to communicate this to your target audience in the Philippines? So you will do this by catering your messaging directly to highlight your price transparency, quality services, and social impact for foreign workers. As well, you can start promoting your message through social media channels by leveraging SEOs and by capitalizing on word-of-mouth marketing and making a physical presence known in local markets to help more effectively reach the desired female target falling in the 24 to 40 age range, as they are making up a larger portion of the workforce.
So the strategy that Claire and Zach have just outlined as stage 1 of our implementation stands to reason that it would affect a large amount of the population due to the fact that we are doubling the presence that we will have through the operations. So taking a look at how many workers are importing, my apologies for the small writing, on the right-hand side, we have the amount of workers importing as about 340,000 in 2014, all the way up to 2020 being 400,000 and assumed to be 600,000 by the time that 2047 comes. We know that 55% are going to be immigrating from the Philippines to become migrant workers in Hong Kong. So what impact can stage one have? Increased Filipinos served by doubling the amount of workers that you have on the ground would help with 2.6 thousand Filipinos served. It would also assist, including the people currently working in Indonesia, would help you assist in total about 7,000 people and a total debt savings impact of $8.8 million in the next 5 years. That certainly sets a new standard and is a great place to grow from.
Now, looking at our recruitment pipeline, we have seen how stage one of our implementation is able to plant a seed at the source with the workers. Now, how can we alter demands from employers to meet those workers' supply? The second stage of our implementation, we call growing the pledge network. So currently, FEA has the Fair Hiring Pledge, which encompasses about 20 multinational corporations who, by signing this pledge, are committing to ethical hiring and ethical treatment of their employees. Now, while this currently is primarily a PR tool to show their commitments, this can be used as a more tangible benefit to those companies because of the benefits that we see with employees being trained ethically. And by growing the amount of companies signed onto this pledge, this can become a message not only for how the company looks at recruitment, but how the industry is changing how they view recruitment. So when looking at growing the amount of companies in this pledge, we have identified two primary targets for growth. The first one being more multinational corporations of similar stature to Credit Suisse, Barclays, and other organizations that have already signed on to this pledge. Additionally, we suggest identifying the most frequent employer clients that FEA already has to target a potentially different segment of the market in medium-sized businesses. These will be easier targets because they already trust the services to become official pledgers and show publicly how the recruitment industry is changing. Additionally, we recommend offering an additional incentive to these companies that have joined the pledge. Currently, what they receive are education based on ethical hiring, as well as certain resources to use as well. But what we suggest adding is to give them priority access to the well-trained fair employment pipeline that has started being created through the Honest Jobs in Philippines. This will give them access to not only well-trained employees, but both healthy, happy, and sustainable employment engagements. Now, because we suggest offering an additional, if we could just go back a slide real quick. Because we are offering an additional incentive, we recommend raising the fee, but not by much, only by 3.5%. Namely, because we are creating a more streamlined service from start to finish, but also because increasing it by 3.5% meets the statistical average for what a recruitment agency is charging, which is a great statement piece for FEA, who wants to show that any average agency can perform ethically. To fulfill this plan, we recommend hiring one business relationship manager who will primarily be in charge for the outreach to various organizations, as well as finalizing the contracts to signing organizations onto the pledge. The added bonus of raising the fee is that the business relationship manager will ultimately pay for itself.
So how are you going to get more companies interested? A critical aspect to keep in mind is the need to develop positive relationships with these companies you are approaching when trying to communicate the value proposition that can be attained. For this to work, you want to make sure efforts are being focused on educating and offering solutions to companies when trying to get them interested in joining the pledge. As well, the messaging for this step is reiterating the benefits attainable from signing on to the pledge, and those being that they will have happier employees with less turnover from mismatched workers and can ultimately recognize overall better efficiency and productivity within their companies.
So now we have shown how we can adjust the supply of workers to seek more ethical jobs, and how we can adjust the demands of employers to seek more ethical recruitment. What this does is it puts pressure back into the middle, where you can start making change among agencies in the industry. And this is how. The third step of our implementation is the Fair Employment Certification. Through the increased supply and demand for ethical employment, it will require more capital to process this different kind of workers and worker-employer relationships. However, the goal of ethical companies such as fair employment agencies is to help lift the industry rather than dominate it. So that's why when looking at a long-term consideration, rather than expanding the firm itself, the fair employment certification is an alternate way to help grow the model and the mission. Now, the FE certification, next slide, will essentially convert the current fair recruitment model that fair employment agencies uses to fulfill its recruitment. This is a model that shows the hiring process from start to finish in several countries with several stakeholders, and it is the reason why they have become one of the more dominant agencies within Hong Kong. By turning it into a more robust certification, fair employment agencies can grant this to other Hong Kong recruitment agencies as a third-party certification of sorts, especially within the ethical realm. Third-party certifications carry a lot of weight to show that there are actions and standards that are backing up the words of these companies. Additionally, there is a tangible benefit to these agencies seeking out the certification once they see the demands of the industry changing, because they will have access not only to the fair employment pipeline that has been created through Honest Jobs and through the pledge, but will also receive resources to create their own recruitment pipelines so that the reach can broaden even further. It's also important to note that this plan will allow the model and the mission of fair employment agencies to grow beyond just Hong Kong and into other countries as well. Rather than trying to set up branches, it'll just be easier to analyze and to approve various other agencies with this model. So now that we've been able to plant the seed in the workers and the employers to put pressure into the agencies, let's take a look at the financial impact that this plan will have.
Thanks so much, Alex. So step one is essentially reinvesting into the foundation of your company. That will entail to have hires in the Philippines to be able to have that expansion. And also additionally, with the influx of Filipino workers coming into the FEA in Hong Kong, there will also need to be new hires in the Hong Kong area as well. Additionally, technology and rent are included, as well as, like Alex had said, the business relationship manager, and further into the future, lawyers, as well as a team for the certification development. On the right-hand side at the very bottom in black at 1.9 million, this is about how much this entire plan is going to cost you, which puts you in good standing because it allows you to reinvest a lot of that profit to be able to rejuvenate and grow while still keeping some, just in case there are any additional expenses. I'll now pass it on to Zach.
We've put in place 3 KPIs to evaluate the success of each stage of this implementation. With the expansion into the Philippines stage, we've put a 10% annual increase in workers using the service as a KPI to ensure that growth is occurring. The stage 2 KPI will be a 25% annual increase in companies signed to the Fair Hiring Pledge, and this is to ensure that companies that sign, this is in the best interest of the companies that we are looking to pursue. And the last stage with the certification, we want to see a 2.5% of already ethical agencies in the first year under the certification, and that is represented by 10 firms. Next slide, please. Heading into the timeline, we can see that the expansion into the Philippines and stage 2 with the relationship building both begin at the same time and will take 6 months, whereas the relationship building will continue on into the future. With the 2-year mark arriving, we will then enter the certification phase, and that will take no longer than 2 years. Next slide, please. There are 2 potential risks that may occur in this implementation. The first being resistance in the Philippines to office merging plans. The mitigation for this would be the implementation of an ADCAR change management model to improve the quality of work. The other potential risk is some smaller clients are lost due to the fee increase, and this can be mitigated by implementing a tiered system which offers services pertaining to certain willingness to pay clients.
Now, to conclude, we have shown you today how we have turned this essentially in the Black industry that is plagued by oversaturation and underregulation, and how planting the seeds in various stages of the pipeline can turn this industry into a lush and ethical place where at each level, many stakeholders are forced into change, and it's very positive change. With this, you can grow not only your company, but your mission beyond the reach of your company and help the Hong Kong industry and the Asian recruitment industry as a whole. Thank you, and we'll open the floor to some questions.
Thank you for your presentation. We have now 15 minutes for the Q&A session. May we have the first question, please?
Okay, I can start, sorry. Thanks for your presentation. Just a quick trying to understand. What do you think your plan may not work apart from the risk you've identified? What do you think is the biggest weakness in your plan?
First and foremost, solidifying that the Philippines can be an ethical place to then bring in migrant workers is first and foremost needing to be ensured when we move forward with this. The risk put forward with the mitigation of the ADCAR model would be pertaining to actual employees, but we need to understand the climate as a whole, particularly when considering potential expansions into Indonesia as well.
And just to follow up on that, and then what do you think, what kind of lobbying do you think you need to do with the stakeholders to get or try to mitigate the risk that you identified? It wasn't very clear to me in what actions are you taking outside the workers, employers, and the agency. What other stakeholders are you trying to cater to?
So the main challenge with the industry is that there are many agencies that are currently partaking in illegal activity, and Fair Employment Agencies is opting to take the higher route, and other than put other companies down, is trying to lift everybody else up. So in terms of challenge, that is definitely a honorable strategy to take, and it's definitely not the easiest. So while there is elements of lobbying to get the employers onto the pledge so that there can be significant value to the pledge and a significant shift in demand, it would be difficult to have certain things enforced that haven't been before because there is illegal activity happening and nobody seems to be doing about it. So that's why we have opted to go for an alternate route of educating everybody so that they can simply avoid malpractice on their own behalf rather than try to lobby legally or anything like that, because the system is just too far deep into the mess.
Just a question for me, just around the financials, if you wouldn't mind just going to that slide and maybe articulating to us just a little bit around what your assumptions were around the financials, and I guess what are some of the risks that you face in that forecasting that you presented?
Certainly. Just to clarify, you're talking about the very first financial situation with the amount that they were able to reinvest?
Just around the forecast that you presented out. So.
Yeah. Perfect. So I wrote my assumptions here for you so I can walk you through the process. These are some of the numbers that were given in the case. The biggest assumption that I used, if you don't mind, I'm actually just going to go to make sure that I'm talking about the right page with you, is here. This is the one that you were speaking to?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we backed out this number, the biggest assumption that went into this is that I took a even growth rate for the costs. And so what I mean by that is we know right now that they had 5,000 workers that they had helped place, and we knew that they did not become profitable until 2018. So in a simplification, I just took an even across number for how many costs that would be. I averaged it out to make sure that we could be profitable in 2018. And then from there, I projected a growth of the very first number I used for the volume is the industry average of how many people are placed by agency. And then I continued to grow that pretty much exponentially up until the point of 2020. The reasoning that I did that is I assumed that they would need to get traction to have quite a growth determined on, I used the technology adoption rate at 2.5 to assume that the growth was increasing. From there, when we moved down to cost, as I have previously said, I had assumed that the costs were averaged. And so I went with the rent, saying that it would probably be 30% in Canada. Rent isn't supposed to be more than 30%. And then from there, you can see the breakdown that I used down to 10% for marketing to get our total costs. The profits, as you can see at the very bottom, are 2.9. The largest assumption is absolutely in the costs. We know that the revenue total for sure would stay the same based on how many workers that they had placed, as well as their price per worker that they had claimed. But definitely the costs could be higher or a little bit lower, depending on their actual structure.
So what is this slide saying? So what's the bottom number? You got 2.96 million is saying what? So this is the profit that is currently estimated in the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So they had talked about wanting to reinvest the profits into this growth. So I just wanted to make sure that this was a viable option for the company going forward, based on the implementation that we're going to put in play.
Okay. So your assumption is all the profit from 2017 to 2020 is reinvested back?
Yes, absolutely.
And then have you compared this 2.9 versus how much your future cost will take of the project?
Yes, absolutely. That was the 1.9 million in the implementation costs. And that was a very conservative budget, saying that we almost had to double the team in Hong Kong, as well as with legal and additional hires. So that was quite a robust implementation cost that put us at 1.9. Meaning that we would still have $1 million left to have as an emergency fund to ensure that this plan was rolled out smoothly.
And what is the key risk that you see in terms of achieving this?
Certainly, in terms of achieving the implementation, or in terms of achieving the profit here?
Well, I would say they'd both be linked, right? So what would you see in terms of achieving what you presented here would be, I guess, what is your downside effectively? And how have you mitigated that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of our financials, I took, as we have mentioned, the assumption of the profit of the last 6 years. I think the key risk going into the Philippines in terms of the downside going further is it could be much more expensive to rent the buildings than I had. If you don't mind, I'm going to go to the implementation costs. We are assuming in the Philippines that we will capture 2 times the amount of people in the Philippines. And so I believe that our risk would be starting more slowly than that and funneling a lot of costs into 2 centers that potentially won't reach any level of profitability for, let's say, 3 years. But I think the important part to remember with this not-for-profit here is that costs are secondary in the sense that the impact comes first. And I think that while there is a downside that we might not reach profitability, I don't know if that's the key factor driving this decision for this company.
I think we probably agree with your comment there. Then I think, but then we still need to make sure that the financial grounds, make sure that there is ability to see through the short-term liquidity. So you identify that the profit that is generated in the business is there to cover your 1.9 million budget that will be all consumed in 1 year.
No, it likely wouldn't be. So as Zach had mentioned, we have a timeline where some financials begin as soon as right now, and that would be all the way up until the STAR, essentially. So all of those fees would be occurred in the first year, absolutely. So there is a little bit of flexibility. However, when I did do the profit analysis, I did not take into account getting any more revenue. So you would still be getting revenue from like your 2021 people that are coming into the company. And so that would definitely help create that nest egg of comfort, as well as grow that emergency fund as well. And so for the last 2 lines, those wouldn't occur until year 2. So the majority of it, I would say about 80% would be invested today.
Sorry, we also talked about bringing your Philippines training center into one roof. There was a slide talking about that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and how does this link back to your financials?
Yes, that's a great question. So the way that this links back to our financials is at this point in time, we had assumed that Fair Training Center as well as Honest Jobs were operating with a very lean budget out of in two separate companies. The way that this impacts the financials is we have put these into one building. So we put down a charge for one building in Manila, as well as one building in Davao, as well as we brought on salaries for 2 more workers in each, as well as we took a look at any tech implementation costs that would need to be done to automate the system. And additionally, we took a look at extra fees that we would need to incur to bring on more staff in Hong Kong to deal with the influx of people that might be sent to the FEA in Hong Kong.
Okay, so you have assumed it, but not shown that breakup. It's more shown as one combined costing incurred in year one, basically.
Okay, so to confirm, in the very first slide that I had put in, this was a snapshot of the last 6 years. In the implementation costs, this is going to be what is incurring next year. And so when I went to the implementation costs, we had new hired for step 1, which is the 2 people that you're going to have. I have new salaries for the step 1, which is the people in the Philippines, rent for the 2 new buildings in the Philippines, new technology for the new buildings in the Philippines, and then the additional Hong Kong hires to deal with the influx. Unfortunately, I did not have it summed up on this slide. However, these would be the main costs incurred for step 1 of the process that I had outlined in the previous housing slide.
This is the combined cost of the integrated entity, you're saying, right?
Of the implementation of the 2 new buildings, yes.
Okay. And can we go to your forecasted revenue slide, please? The 2025 one. Sorry, just 3 minutes remaining. So how many new workers are you predicting to come up? I think you just passed that slide, didn't it? There was a 2025. It predicted a profit of, this one. So how many new workers are you getting in year 1 to year 5, just as a very high level?
Yeah, absolutely. So from year 1, which starts in 2021 all the way until 2025, I took the doubling of so right now at this 0.21 in 2020 in the third last line, this was the amount of Filipino workers that we were capturing at FEA. So I 2x'd that, and that is the main assumption. However, with this one, I assumed that we had equal amounts of workers coming in. So at 833 per year, that would total for the 5,000 that we had captured. So I assumed that we were almost doubling that. So at the very last line here, new people per year would be 917 that we would be helping through the Filipino location.
And this does not assume the other solutions that you said around bringing in more agencies, etc., which is more, you're just doing it more for ethical, social cause, is it?
Yeah, so this one, we just wanted to, on this slide, showcase of the incoming workers that we could capture 0.42% of those incoming workers to help have a total debt savings impact of 8.8 million. So we just wanted to showcase that with this implementation of heading into the Philippines, that you can achieve the mission that you had set in place, which was to help get people out of debt bondage.
So basically trying to solve 8.8 million out of the total 700 million bucket, basically.
Sorry, I missed that.
So the debt bondage or the illegal practices are on Hong Kong dollar 700 million a year, right? So this is what your contribution to basically convert that, say, assuming it remains the same year on year, this will be what you will take it out of that bucket to save ethically, right?
Yeah, I think this is what we would be contributing to the ethical savings in the next 5 years, which would be that 8.8 million for these workers. However, this number just goes to show the alleviated burden on the workers' lives, as opposed to some financial number that it's not an actual monetary value. It's just how much you can alleviate the debt burden from these workers.
Okay. And just over time, I think 12 seconds.
Excellent. Well,
Thank you, everyone. The judges will now stay in the room to deliberate. Dear team, we'll place you in the waiting room for a few minutes and bring you back for the feedback session.